workers are tired from their long day's work. They're heading home to wash their feet and get some rest. We let our hearts nod off for a moment and wait for dark night to fall so we can go out and scratch the earth for a yam root or some sweet potatoes to eat, a puddle of water to sip. Between them and us, the dogs, who have been running all day, begin to get drowsy, their bellies stuffed with a human feast their race is not about to forget. Soon they'll turn wild and even start biting into living, moving flesh because they've figured out that there are no longer any borders between animals and their masters. But for the time being, tiny, clandestine peace knows that there is not a single living soul out on the roads that can capture it. And so it can go out to greet the tall grasses as they straighten their spines on the hillsides, and the birds that stayed all day with their heads tucked under their wings, so as not to bear witness, so they'll never be called to testify at some tribunal, a day which will surely come. Peace goes out to greet the flowers gorged with water from the rainy season, still struggling to exhale a fragrance of life in spite of it all, in a place where the stench of rot has seeped into everything. That's what you would say when you still used to speak, Mama. Your words full of holes while you waited for your son Bosco to come back from the cabaret that night in 1997. You would use the present tense at that late hour of the day to share your memories of the month of April 1994, as if those 3 years had not irremediably separated us. And the white wreath of smoke that escaped from your hand or came from my half-open mouth, yours, Imhara, mine, Inhore, two cigarette brands from before, the only ones we still wanted to smoke, as if to ward off the killing time, unless it was just a way to suffocate so slowly on the effluvia of the past. Our west met and enfolded us in a reassuring cloud. Sitting on the same wobbly little wooden bench as before on the Barza, the terrace, on the main road in Butare, and the broad trunks of the jacaranda trees hid us from the passers-by. You lapsed into your memories on the month of milk that became the month of blood, ukwezi kwa mata kwahindutse ukw'amaraso, between two moments of silence when you might just as well have been sobbing your heart out. And I listened to you, wondering whether my hand, which was itching to squeeze your wrist, might not startle you. So I didn't move, but blow my smoke toward yours so that it would reach you and loosen your clenched sorrow. Although I knew nothing about chemistry, I recall that lovely word sublimation from the time our teacher explained how solids turn to gas, and I thought that there must be a procedure which, in the same way, would allow organisms that had become rigid to blow away in the form of smoke without dying for all that, simply in order to meet harmoniously in the ether, invisible to anyone going by. I pictured myself as Inhore, a warrior dancer with long ivory hair, carrying a blunt lance and a tiny shield of sculpted wood, whirling around you, Imhara hounded antelope, with your tortured boar horns. I'd surround you with a row of rescued words, resuscitated words. As a violent Inhore, with my arms outstretched, my back arched, I'd cause the earth to tremble. My feet will be decorated with little Amayugi bells, and I'd cause the threatening enemy to retreat by vaunting your mighty deeds, your children, your lovers, your freedom that had become at such a cost. And while the night helped us to vanish quickly into the gloom of the bazaar, I listened to your voice, nodding my head, and in my movements were and if my movements were imperceptible, because I had long forgotten how to touch you, up there in the smoke, I caused them to dance, those strands of white sisal decorating my brow like an inhore, dancing poet, ceremonial combatant capable of warding off your death that month of April.
Thank you. As you all can hear, that's a really beautiful opening to this book. It's an intergenerational story that was Blanche, the middle generation that was speaking, sitting with her mother, Immaculata, is how you would say that, correct?
Yes.
And then later we'll meet Blanche's son, Stokely. Beata, why did you choose to open the book with that?
The book is divided in three voices, I will say, and each time it's one voice is a chapter, and this is the chapter when you can hear the voice of Blanche, the daughter. So maybe I can first start by explaining what is the plot, what is the story. It's a family story that takes place between France and Rwanda, and it starts in the late 50s, just after the independence. The story of this family, not the book, the story of the family. It starts in the late 50s, just after the independence, and it ends nowadays. And so, as I said, there are three voices, and those three voices represent three generations. The first generation is Immaculata. She's the mother and then becomes the grandmother, and she will spend her entire life in Africa, in Rwanda. She is a survivor of the genocide against the Tutsi, and she's a person who has been silenced by the painful memories of her life, of her family's life. The second character, Blanche, and this chapter starts with Blanche, but immediately after the start, you hear the voice of the mother, and it's always, for me, the entanglement of the different voices. Blanche is the daughter of Immaculata, and she was born and raised in Rwanda by Immaculata, a single mother, but she managed to seek refuge in France in 1994. Whereas her mother, Immaculata, will stay in Rwanda, and she's, as I said, she will become a survivor of the genocide. Blanche settles in Europe, in France. She's a mixed race. Her father is French, and she will continually travel between one land to another in order um, to renew broken ties with her Rwandan family. And when her grandson Stockley, who you mentioned, is born, and he will be born and raised in France, she will try to connect her son with her mother, and then the third voice will be the one of Stockley. At least it's the narrator will tell the story of this little child, mixed race child too. And so yeah, the beginning for me was a way to meet with those two characters, to meet also with a situation, because it starts in 1997. This is the moment when Blanche comes back in Rwanda for the first time after the genocide, and so there is the feeling that something is wrong in this family. There is a lot of pain. There is a lot of unspoken words, and yeah. So it's a story that starts with the fragment of a story. Blanche talks, but immediately after she brings the voice of her mother. It's a confession that will be almost immediately be interrupted in the second page, because the conversation between the mother and the daughter is really hard, and it's a family that carries a very heavy burden. Mostly the burden of Blanche is the she feels kind of guilty because she has survived. She has left at the beginning of the genocide, so she hasn't been through the whole thing, and you can hear that the mother is thinking about Bosco. Bosco is the son of Immaculata. He's the half brother of Blanche, and you don't hear him. So the narrator talks about him, and he's not mixed race. He's 100% black, but he's mixed in another way because Immaculata is Tutsi, but the father of Bosco is Hutu, so he has another kind of mixed identity. And he was, during the genocide, he was gone, and he was part of the RPF, the rebellious army that ended the genocide. So he has another kind of trauma. So that's the beginning, and you have everything there, but most of all, you also have the main scene, which is Butare. As Omar said in the introduction, Butare is the second city. It used to be the second city of Rwanda. Now it has been renamed, and it's called Huye. But back then, when I was born and raised there, it was called Butare. And so those two characters, they are sitting on a bench in the main road of Butare that used to be planted with jacaranda trees. And those jacaranda trees will also be kind of a testimony of the story of the family during decades. That will have also a role in the story there. Yes, that's what I can say about the opening scene.
Yeah, thank you. You explained it very well. I hope everybody gets the chance to read the book for themselves. But for those that haven't had that chance yet, that's a great way to, give everybody the background of it. It struck me as I read it, using the three, different narrators and kind of four as you get to the very, very end of the book, and contrasting Blanche and Immaculata's experience, especially right at the beginning, their experience of giving birth to their sons. And you chose to put stories right next to each other to kind of contrast that. And then also later, as throughout the book, the use of their voices, right? Immaculata deals with a lot of her trauma by quieting down, even though she had been very vocal her whole life, correct? And then Blanche struggling with that as well. How did you, well, first you chose to use women as kind of the main characters, obviously. Why was it important for the voices of these women and the ways they choose to use or not use their voices? Why was that important to this story?
One day, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I was presenting my books in Kigali, in Rwanda, for a literary festival, Francophone literary festival. And the person who was doing the moderation asked me, there's always, the main characters in your book are always women. And he was asking why. And I said, why not? As a feminist, it's so important for me to bring the voices of women on the first stage and have them heard. So that's what I can say. I wanted those voices to be heard, their experiences. They have different experiences, and also this is something important for me to show that a same event can be lived and understood and felt in different way, depending on your age, on where you were, and how things happen for you after a while. My first book was a short story collection. It's entitled Ejo, and it was also 11 short stories, only women speaking. So I guess that's really important for me. I mean, the word literature basically has been for centuries full of men voices and men writers. So it's high time we started to have those voices heard too. I mean, I'm not the first one, of course, obviously, but I see myself as a writer who gives voice to women, and especially now in Rwanda, it's really important to know that women have access to more power and voice, and it's like few people know that, but it's a country in the world that has the biggest amount of women in the parliament in the world. So things changed, and even Rwanda was really rebuilt after the genocide by the courage and the strength of women. So it's important that they also are at the center of the narration and in literature too. Yes.
Yeah, like you said, there's been a long history of no female voices in literature, and
Yeah,
so
we shouldn't even have to explain why voices of women. They should be the one explain why up to now there have been so many men. And I'm saying that because I think yes, men's voices are important too, but let's share a little bit.
yes, because half the population is not men. Yes, and speaking of how like voices are heard, do you think that there's anything lost in the translation? Obviously, I read this book in English. Was it written originally in French, correct? And then there's Kinyarwanda sprinkled throughout. Um, and then as Omar and I have spoke, we've talked about how Rwanda's traditional oral history is very important. So what do you think, so maybe two parts, what was the translation process like for you for this book? And then also, what do you think is lost in translation?
I really have to say that I was impressed and very happy of the work done by Alison Anderson. I didn't know her, so it's a publishing house, Europa Edition, that contacted her and gave her that work of translating my book. So she did the whole translation at once, and then they sent it to me, and I just had to make some very tiny adjustments because of course she doesn't know Rwanda, and she maybe some elements had been lost, but at the end of the whole process, I was quite happy. And the English is the only language with Kinyarwanda where I can have an eye on the translation, because this book has been translated also into other languages that I don't speak at all. So I can't say. I just have after that to rely on journalists or friends who are bilingual to tell me that if it is correct and faithful. And I have to admit that with other languages, I had bad surprises, but with English, with the work done by Alison Anderson, I was really happy. I don't know, maybe the only thing that might have been lost, but really this is a small critic, is the poetry of the language, the sounds, which this is a book that I wrote just after a poetry book that I had wrote. So I was still very much inhabited with the music of the language, which you can really hear very much in French when I read loud. And I think it is there, but maybe because I'm not completely fluent in English, I didn't get as much as you. Maybe you can tell me. Did you see the poetry and the sound, the musical sound in the language? That's the only thing, but only you can tell me.
I thought, yes, I did think there was a musical element to the language. So kudos to the translator then for preserving that. Yes, I thought it was a very beautiful book, and how kind of brings to light the importance of prose and fiction in telling these stories that are obviously the genocide did happen. And so it's a factual event, but you've brought an element of fiction and prose to it. How do you think, do you think that fiction is a good way to present suffering? Um, and why so or not so?
Hmm. Yes, this is a very good question that I asked myself. I had not planned on becoming a writer at all. I survived the genocide when I was 15 years old, and immediately after, I was very lucky to come in France and to be in a foster family, and I could go back to school, and everything was, you know, um, very comforting for me, and I could go to university, and my first decision of what am I going to do with this second chance of life, because this is how survivors live their lives, was to be a humanitarian worker. So I did that for um, almost 15 years. And it's only late after I was more than 30 years old when I decided to start writing. And so I decided first to not to write a testimony. So this is to answer your question. And why fiction instead of a nonfiction for me? So it comes from my first experience as a survivor when I arrived in France. Uh, because I realized that people were very welcoming, were very friendly. But when I wanted to tell, uh, to testify, to tell what I had been through with my mother, because I was lucky enough to survive with my mother, I realized, I understood that many people, despite all the hospitality they were offering, expected me not to speak about my experience. And this is contradictory with because there is this a common impression, and even it's very often written or said that the genocide is unspeakable, and I are undescriptible. This has been said a lot about the Holocaust, for example. But for me, it was not that it was unspeakable, it was that it was unhearable. Hmm? So I decided not to speak, because I will see, and even now, some people, really close people, French people, when I start to talk about Rwanda, I see that they are ill at ease and they change the subject and they don't want me to talk about that, and so later, right then, I decided not to speak. And later on, some friends admitted that um, different things. Either they were trying to protect me, thinking that silence will allow me not to think about what had happened, and they were ignoring the fact that more than anything, what I wanted was to tell the story again and again. I needed to share that. even if which is completely different. If talking with strangers, talking with friends has nothing to do with talking with your own children. Maybe we'll talk about this later. But right then, they thought, and even people told me, "Oh, they told us not to ask you questions." So, and others admitted that they were trying to protect themselves because the accounts, they had seen what was going on a little bit on TV. It was really very violent, and so the accounts for them were intolerable. Is that right? They were afraid that I would bring this violence into their quiet life in France. So I decided not to speak. And years later, when I decided, I changed my mind. I said, okay, I'm going to write a book. Because I thought that there were a lot of books had been already published about the genocide. Testimonies or books written by journalists, historians who were talking about the facts. I didn't find a very sensitive and a day-to-day experience of the survivors that I was sharing with my friends. So I wanted to write about this, about what is it like to be a survivor after the genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda. And so when I decided to write, I choose fiction because I hoped to find a reassuring distance that will allow me to be heard by the people, all those people for whom it was unhearable, those for whom the testimonies of the facts were intolerable. So that's why I decided, and fiction was also very comfortable for me because I didn't have to talk immediately about myself. And so this is when I wrote the first collection of short stories. As I told you, it is entitled Ejo. Ejo, it's the same word in Kinyarwanda it means both yesterday and tomorrow. And so I wanted to write stories of before and after the genocide. I'm not going to talk to you about the genocide. I'm going to talk to you about before and after. It was another way of taking my readers gently and by the hand, and without frightening them, and lead them little by little to the edge of the abyss of our experience, I would say. And so I wrote 2 short story collection, poetry, and then this first novel, All Your Children Scatters, where the main theme is not genocide, actually. There are different themes. Of course, the genocide is in the center of the story of the family, but there is also the question of exile, migration, mixed race, transmission, a lot of things. And then I realized, yes, if you have this the work on the language, and it's a novel that a lot of people can relate to, even if they're not interested at first on the story of the genocide against the Tutsi. People who are mixed race, people who have the experience of exile, a lot of people can relate it. And this is what I loved about fiction, as I have been a reader since childhood. And what I loved about fiction, about novels, about short stories that I used to read, is that I could relate to people who were so different from me, like someone from the 19th century, or a woman from India or from Russia, and then I had the impression that there were no so much difference and distance between them and me. And this is what I wanted, for people not to have the impression that Rwanda is far away, it's not their story. I don't want to to take this burden of this horror and this. No, I'm going to read a good novel. I'm going to enter in the story and get caught by it, and me as a writer, I will have them relate to our story and see that this is not only an African story. This is a crime against humanity. So it can concern them. So that's what fiction for me brings. Because I know a lot of people who will tell me, no, I'm not going to read a testimony. It's not my story. It's far away. It's too hard. You don't say that about. Oh, okay. If the kind of fiction I write, you can escape from that immediate no.
Yeah, and like you said, the fiction does allow you to readers to relate better to it, perhaps, and see themselves in the story, though they maybe have never been to Rwanda. But everybody has a mother. Everybody has these family stories are very universal, right?
Yes.
As well as the family traumas we endure are somewhat universal as well. So I think your presentation of it is very good because it, yeah, like you said, it makes it approachable and it makes it very human. To you, you talked about it a bit and in your experience as you have lived in France and spoke to people, your friends, but why is it really important for Rwandans to be able to tell their own story in their own ways?
This is another good question. We discussed that a little bit earlier with Omar. So, there is a famous Rwandan proverb, Rwandan say, which says, so in Kinyarwanda it's ijoro riba ruwariraye, and it says that night can only be described by those who stayed awake from dusk until dawn. I think it's the right translation. And yes, I think for a long time throughout the world, I'm not talking about what is going on in Rwanda. I'm talking like me living in France or you in the US. I had the feeling that the history of this genocide has been heard, like do mean heard, through the voices of others, not survivors, whether be the Westerners, who most of them have arrived after the massacres had been committed, or who were there during 1 week, 2 weeks, a few days, and then they wrote books. And there were also Rwandans who were not in the country after the time at the time of the event. Whether there will be refugees abroad, because before the genocide, there had been, since the 50s, the end of the 50s, there had been a lot of pogroms against the Tutsi. So there was a huge community of Tutsi refugees living whether in the neighboring countries or in Canada, in Europe, in the US. And some of those who had families still in Rwanda wrote books like Scholastic Mukasonga or Benjamin Sehene. But they were not survivors, right? And when I said that in the international imagination, those are the people. Okay, there is also my friend Gael Faye, who was born and raised in Burundi, and those are the voices that had been heard. And when I say heard, it's because I want to set aside the idea, which is a misconception, that the survivors themselves did not speak at once, because they did. When I think of the book published in French, for example, I think the first testimony written by a survivor was published in 1998, which is like 4 years only after the genocide. So it's from Yolande Mukagasana, and other survivors have published their testimonies, but by a strange way, they're not the ones that are known or translated a lot. So this is something that struck me. Maybe because their work is not considered as literature, and this is something they're very Westerner. Because those who published their testimonies in Rwanda, they're the ones who are read, they're published, they're heard. So for me, it's important to bring the voices of the survivors at the center of the narrative. Because sometimes you have the impression that they are bringing their stories, but their books are not considered as those from the others. Westerners, journalists, writers will come and take their stories, but then make them into literature, as if us survivors are not allowed into this, elite of literatures. So this is what I'm trying to change with others.
Yes, and Omar and I've discussed a little bit too that kind of the difference between the Western and the Rwanda culture, and sometimes those aren't bridged together. And like you said, how would you define what Rwandan literature is to someone who is non-Rwandan? And is there, yeah.
First of all, Rwandan literature has existed for centuries. And this is something that is also, there is a misconception, which is kind of, I don't know if it's, it's kind of ethnocentrism that exists, that doesn't consider overall literature as literature. Because Rwanda has overall literature that was started centuries ago, but and only written literature arrived after colonization, of course. So if you only consider written things, you will say that our literature is like at its childhood, and we don't have that much. But then if you broaden your way of seeing things, and you catch also all that what had been produced in the centuries ago, then you will see that we have a very, very rich language, very metaphorical, very precious language that has been used by Rwandans to tell their stories. And I always say also, I'm very proud to say that the father of Rwandan poetry actually is a mother, Nyirarumaga. She was, because there was this, I don't know how to say this in English, there was this group of official poets at the court of the king, the Mwami. And their work, everyday work, was to write historiographical poetry that will tell the story of Rwandans one century after the other, the story of the kings, of course, the fights, and all the story of the country. And the woman, the person who launched this group of poets was Nyirarumaga. She was a king mother. But we also have a pastoral poetry, because we have a very ancient culture about the cows, and so we sing poems for the cows, and for all that they bring to the population and things like that. There is also a tradition of what we call imigani. So there are two kinds of imigani. There are imigani that are more like fables. You say that in English, fables? Yes. And also imigani, which are more proverbs. So So we have a very a powerful and rich heritage from our ancestors. And the first book that was, I think I have it here somewhere because my bookshelves are just in front of me. The first book that was published was Mes trans à 30 ans in the 50s during colonial time by a man called Saverio Naigiziki. It even won the second prize of the colonial literature fair in Brussels in the 50 something. And then after that, not a lot of things were published between the 50s and the 90s. Very few, actually. Poetry. We had poets who will publish a little bit in French or Kinyarwanda back then. For example, a great poet called Rugamba. But poetry is not only in like declamation, oral declamation, or written. For people who know the Rwandan culture, poetry is like in everyday's life, in very important moment. For example, when there is a wedding, when there is a important moment in the family, in the society, there will be people who will come and declare things that are poetry. So this is the Rwandan I grew up in. And I have to mention that there were a little bit, some books that were published in English. I have here one, I think it's Silence Passion by Jane Kaberuka, which was really, really hard to find that was published in the diaspora by Rwandans living in Uganda, for example, but very few women. And then since the 90s, there is new literature, written literature that is more or less related to the genocide. So mainly testimonies published by survivors, or testimony published by Rwandans who were not survivors but who had lost part of their family. First novels also arrived. The first, so there were Scholastic Mukasonga, Benjamin Sehene. I'm talking more about the Francophone part, but Omar can complete with the Anglophone. So I said they wrote novels. Most of the novels of Scholastic Mukasonga are talk about stories that happened in the 60s, 70s, or even in the colonial time before the genocide. Benjamin Sehene, he only wrote one non-fiction and one fiction. And also, a lot of survivors. I mentioned earlier Yolande Mukagasana. There is Annie Kaitesi, Berthe Kaitesi, a lot. César Murandira, a lot. I will think about 25 who published in French and English and some in Kinyarwanda. And then there was the first novel published by a survivor, is La Chanson de l'Aube. I think it has not been translated to English, by Vénus Caimaillet, who was working for the French embassy during the genocide, and abandoned by the French embassy, of course. And that's it. And since then, there is a new generation of writers who write fiction. I mentioned Gaël Faye, who published 2 novels, Petit Pays, that is settled in Burundi, but with a background related to Rwanda, and the new novel, Jacaranda, that really talks about the story of Rwanda for the last 50, 60 years. And I think also of Dominique Celis, who is also a friend. She published her first novel 3 years ago. So more and more coming. and what I could see also from the Kigali scene recently, there is a more spoken poetry. There is a scene there, so young people writing. Yeah, a lot of new young writers, and this really fills me with joy and hope that they're real. And also, what I think it's interesting is that they're stories that are not necessarily related to the genocide against the Tutsi, because I think there's not only that story that can be told about Rwanda. There are also other stories. Yeah, so I'm thinking, for example, of a Rwandan who lives in Belgium, Joseph Ndwaniye, who wrote stories that has nothing to do with the genocide. And yeah. So long oral literature, short time written literature. And for me, for example, when I wrote my first short story collection, I really wanted to relate to this oral literature. So every short story is introduced by a proverb, an umugani. And the second short story also, I translated the fables from the ancient time, from Kinyarwanda to French. So yeah, it's important for me to say that we're not coming from nothing. We have inherited from a beautiful language literature that we can use in nowadays.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you brought in, the oral traditions, and that there's a long history of those in Rwanda, and that is an important part of the literature. Um, and you touched on it a little bit, but how do you see the role of like the Rwandan diaspora authors like yourself or Omar, that are no longer living in Rwanda but still contributing to the literature and have deep ties to the country? How do you see that connecting to the literature coming out of Rwanda itself?
I think Omar is doing a wonderful job, much more than me. I mean, I'm just writing my stories, and as this is something that you see in a lot of diasporas all around the world. It's like um, the people who are abroad are sometimes more involved in preserving the culture, the traditional culture or the history, than those who are within the country and trying to invent new things and things like that. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. What I will say is that what we do is try to connect with each other, first of all, and also we are influenced by the culture of the country where we live now. Now I'm half, and I have the double nationality, so I'm very much also into the French literature scene. So maybe this is something interesting, as Omar is doing in the US, connecting with other actors of literature, but also with historians, and I think we kind of broaden something, but we also keep something from the past. For me, it's important to bring back my stories in Rwanda, which I have been doing for the last years, because there's a literature festival, Francophone Literature Festival. And I even go further by, like my first short story collection is being translated to Kinyarwanda, so it will be published there. Because I don't write in Kinyarwanda. I went to school in French from kindergarten, so my Kinyarwanda is a day-to-day life Kinyarwanda, not literature. I wouldn't be able to write, for example, poetry in Kinyarwanda. So I write in French because French is now my reading and writing language. But I really wanted to make sure that it goes back to my native language. So my books are being translated, and at least one is being translated to Kinyarwanda, and I'm going to present there probably next year there. But then also I can say that we make sure by the position we manage to get in the literature scene in Western countries allow us to share not only our books but the books of others, and to have this story known by Americans, French people, as Omar does with the Inhuru, which is really a great project. And then the other thing is I can see that young Rwandans are not that much, but like all around the world, that not that much into reading. So they prefer music. There are a lot of in theater, which is quite important and good too. There's a really good theater scene in Kigali, and maybe less reading, less writing than those who are abroad. But yeah, I think we connect the world to our histories in a way, and it's not huge, but for me, it's a little contribution to the narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an important contribution. It's like you said, being Francophone, writing in French, you can connect more easily to those in the country you live in right now. Omar writing in English next to American or other English speakers, and able to bring everybody back through that Rwandan
Mm. And it's
diaspora.
really important to have the Rwandan voices heard. And I mean, not only my voice. I'm really someone who is always thinking collective, because as I told you at the beginning, our story has been told by others to others. We were just like bystanding there, and so the reappropriation of the narrative is really important, because we were badly told to the others. First of all, the story of Rwanda was told by us, was rewritten by the colonial administration, and they changed the story. They said that Hutu and Tutsi and Twa were different races, different ethnies, where we have the same languages, the same culture, the same pre-colonial religion. So even the antagonization of our society is due to a mistelling of our story. And this led to the genocide, which is really how you see the power of the stories. So today, saying that let us tell our story, let us tell our stories, and be the one who said what really happened and what it did to us is crucial, is vital. So yeah, that's it. That's important.
Yeah, like you said, it's very vital. Omar's project here, the Nkuru Library, their goal is to let survivors speak, to let people that have experienced this tell it in their own words, and not through others, right? Which has been a long history. Like you said, the most popular books, unfortunately, or about the genocide against the Tutsis are written by journalists that people might know. And so it's important to start bringing and letting those become stories like yours and like Omar's that are told straight from those who experienced it.
Yes, and I'm not saying some journalists did a great job. Some of them.
Yeah.
I'm not just throwing everything. Some journalists did a great job there. Testify. For example, here in France, for years and years, for decades, we had a negation of the responsibility of the French state and army in the genocide. And so there were some journalists, very courageous journalists, like Patrick de Saint-Exupéry, who did write about the reality. And so those people are on our sides. They are allies. So, but others were just doing their own business with African story. I always tell people that they should read this very powerful text, a satire by the Kenyan writer Binyavanga Wainaina, How to Write About Africa. It was published in the Granta magazine. So if you want to see how sometimes Western journalists wrongly write about Africa, just read this text and you will understand what I mean. And yes, and this is an issue that really I mentioned because this year for the first time I published a nonfiction book. So almost 30 years after the genocide, I decided to write a book about my story, but most of all about an enquête, a quest that I made for years, more than 15 years, looking for pictures that had been taken by journalists and humanitarian workers at the time when I crossed the border. And working on these images on the media, the work done by the media during the genocide, I realized a lot of things. And so I decided to write this book, not only for me, but also for the people who survived with me, because I managed to escape Rwanda thanks to a convoy of trucks organized by a Swiss NGO. And so there were hundreds of children who were with me in this convoy. And when I published this book, it was a collective, like both an individual narrative, but also a collective a memory that I wanted to share. And I was quite happy because a lot of children who were in the convoy could read this book, and some of them were really very small children. They didn't have a lot of memories, so that they could find back the memory of the way we escaped. And then after that, now we have a project with other survivors or Rwandans who had families who were survivors, where we support other survivors who want to write their testimony. So this is something, through this project, it's always also a way to say, I don't only want my story to be heard or to be read. I really want to support others who are maybe not at ease with words and with writing as me, but we can support them, and we want their books to exist too.
Yeah, and as you've been working on a nonfiction piece, how has the process writing this nonfiction project versus your prose and All Your Children Scattered, how has that process been different for you?
It's much harder, really. And not only because I was writing about what I've been through during the genocide. This was not the hard part. The hard part was, first of all, trying to find people, have interview with people, finding the pictures, because I was looking for the pictures that were taken in June 1994 at the border and from the Butare to Burundi. And so I was looking for archives, and I realized that I was not expected to have access to the archive, because I was not a journalist, I was not a researcher, I was not working for the tribunal. I was just a person on the pictures. This was my story, but I couldn't have access to it. So it was really hard, this first part. And then I wrote the book. And when I finished the book, it was really important for me that all the people that I quote and that for whom I say the real name would agree with that. I wanted it to be a collective, something that I didn't want to talk on behalf of the people without their agreement, because I was saying that this is what has been done for a long time with African, and it has to stop. So I sent to every person I mentioned the name in the book, their part, saying, okay, do you agree with that? Do you want me to change something? And really, I didn't want to make people mad at me, of course, because, and most of the time I was saying nice things about them. But at the moment when I did, it was like for 2 months after finishing the first draft that I felt like if everybody says no, there's no book anymore. So it was very stressful, really. But people accepted. All the children in the of the convoys had a really beautiful reaction. They were thanking me for writing this book for them, for their children. The journalists were not always very easy because they were very much attentive to the image it will give of them, even if they had not always been very nice with me. I mean, not all. But at the end, the book was published, and it was a big relief that I managed to do it. And what was wonderful also, you can write I don't think a lot of novels will change the life of the person who write it or the person who inspired it. But this book was, so the title is The Convoy. It will be out in the UK at the end of February, and a few months after, I guess, in the US. So this book, The Convoy, literally changed a lot of things. It was a performative book. It changed a lot of things for me because I had spent 15 years trying to find the other children scattered all around the world. And thanks to the book, because it was in the media, I was on TV, on the radio, a lot of children contacted me. And so we could gather again. It was really, really very moving. And almost every week there is a new person contacting me saying, I was also a children in one of the children in the convoy. And so now we are meeting each other, and it's really important. And also it was very important for me to thank the humanitarian workers who had saved us, because nobody knew their name, nobody had ever heard of them and what they had managed to do, which was saving more than 1,000 children during the genocide against the Tutsi. So this was also important to recognize those people. But I must say that fiction is more comfortable because you can do whatever you want. You can invent whatever story you want, and nobody's going to tell you that this is not true.
Yes, because that's implied with fiction, is to have
Yes.
a degree of freedom there. There's clearly, a heavier burden sharing others' stories beyond just your own. And I hear that as you talk about your newest book. As we're thinking about, how Western and Rwandan literature and literature from the diaspora, how do they all work together? Where do you see them coming together and working together to contribute to the memory of Rwanda and especially the genocide against the Tutsis?
So there are two questions. How do they work together? And then how do they contribute to the story, the writing the history?
Yes.
I think they do work together because the people who are in the diaspora, most of the time they go back in Rwanda or they meet with the other writers, and we don't have the same kind of audience, of course. Those who are in the diaspora are more published by Western publishing house and they are read by Westerners. I think what is a pity is a few writers who live in Rwanda and publish in Rwandan publishing house get to be read abroad. Even if there are some publishing houses that manage to have a very interesting diffusion abroad. I'm thinking of an Anglophone publishing house. I don't remember because they just published a book. It's like 100 stories, and it was. I've heard that there was a launching in London last week. So yeah, there are some, but otherwise it's not always the same audience. And of course, a lot of people in Rwanda don't buy books. There are very few libraries in Rwanda nowadays. For example, the city where I was born and raised in Butare, it was a university city. And when I was a kid, we had one library. We had two libraries and one bookstore for a small city, which was really amazing. So this is how I managed to read a lot of books when I was a kid and a teenager. And now, if you go in Huye, former Butare, there is no library, and there is maybe there is a library at the university, but only for students, and no bookstore. So yeah, the situation is, but I guess it's like in all the countries, people are on their phones and they don't, or they watch TV and they don't read anymore. But yeah, so if you're a writer in Rwanda, it's really hard to get your book bought, and there is not a big literature economy, book economy, which is quite a pity. But that's it. Like in a lot of African countries, I mean, apart from South Africa, Kenya, and maybe a little bit of Senegal, but and Nigeria, of course. Nigeria has a very important publishing scene, but that's it. And how do we contribute to the writing of the history of Rwanda? I think we do a little bit. Of course, this can't replace the book, the work done by scholars, by the researchers to work on the history. But it's a popular way of having people know what happened, of course, and to keep a trace of the past. Yes. And I think there are more young Rwandans today who are involved in the preservation of the memory through art than through academic, for example. I asked a friend of mine who is a historian how many students today, say in the universities in Rwanda, are studying history or even social science, but history, very, very few. I think there are more who are doing theater, music, writing, spoken poetry than those who are studying and doing research on the history, which is quite a pity. But I guess this is also the consequence of 40 years of what we call in France politique d'ajustement structurel, like the policies that were decided in the 90s that in Bretton Woods, IMF, Fonds Mondial International, and the World Bank, saying that we don't have to invest in education and that's a consequence. So the education now is, nobody wants to become a historian because nobody wants to become a teacher at the university because it's not really well paid.
Yeah, we see that even in America as well. A heavy focus on what we call STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math. Definitely
And
leaves behind
business.
the
And
humanities.
business. Yes.
And business, yes. But yeah, as we think about, oh, and also I've seen a few come in, but we will have a short question and answer period towards the end of this. So if any of our audience members have questions, feel free to send them in the chat and I will ask them to Beata for you and we'll discuss them towards the end. So thank you for those who have sent some already. But yeah, if you have questions and comments, just send them in the chat in the Zoom and we can discuss them once I finish all of the other questions I have. But yeah, as we're talking about the the role that memory has in memorialization, memorialization as you are remembering collectively and also individually. I know this is what Omar's research is on, is how memorials make memory and change the narrative and create the narrative. But how do you see literature um, kind of creating and guiding the narrative in
Mm.
about experiences in Rwanda?
I'm going to try to translate a quote from a writer that I like very much. He was a survivor of the Holocaust, and he survived the Holocaust when he was like 10 years old. Aaron Appelfeld. He died a few years ago, so he was living in Israel. And he said something that I find quite interesting. He says that literature is the tool to connect the past, the present, and the future. He says that if you focus only on the past, you're a historian. If you focus only on the present, you're a journalist. And if you focus on the future, then maybe you're a sci-fi filmmaker. But then literature is the way to connect the three tenses. And I think this is interesting. This way of giving depth to our experiences and making them resonate. And this is a place of literature. Yes.
Yeah, I love that you say, and bringing in other authors and what they've talked about,
Mm.
how that really bridges it. Literature is the way to bridge all of the past, present, and future.
Yes, yes, yes. And for me, even before starting writing, I really constantly um, searched through the library, and notably the works of the survivors of other genocides, to find the words that could explain to myself what I've been through, and to put right words on my own. So yeah, it's for me, reading Aaron Appelfeld, Imre Kertész, Primo Levi, and Alain Fosse was really important. And in my latest sorry, my latest book, nonfiction, I talk a lot about what the writings of those survivors, how it helped me shape my own mind and my own writing.
Yes, because sometimes you just don't have the words yet. Um, and so reading others' experience and sharing those can help you create the
Yes, you
understanding
know
of
that quote
yours.
from James Baldwin. You think that
Mhm.
your pain and your heartbroken are unprecedented in the story of the humanity, and then you read. And this is what I experienced. I experienced that twice when I was young. First was with like the connection with other survivors of other genocides, and then also it helped me understand or um, team my blackness, because as you can see, I'm of mixed race. And when I was a child and a teenager in Rwanda, people will tell me that I was white. And then when I arrived in France, people started telling me that I was black, and I didn't know what it was like to be black in the gaze of people. So I started reading literature from the African and Caribbean writers from America, and from the African run, or the diaspora here in Europe, and it helped me, yeah, feel less alone with that new experience of blackness.
Yeah, and that's definitely the power that literature and any in any body of work can have in making us feel less alone, really talking to the human experience.
Mm.
I did want to ask about memories that you have of Butare. Butare, and what they
That's right.
mean.
Good pronunciation.
Thank you. What memories do you have about growing up there, and what do they mean to you in your life today?
Childhood is the source of inspiration of every single writer. There's the Graham Greene, who I don't know if I pronounce well. He said that the bank account of every writer is his childhood, something like that. And for me, Butare is at the same time the place where I experienced the greatest joys and the greatest pain, actually. Because Rwanda is a very beautiful country. People forget that because they also we entered in the white gaze through the genocide, and people didn't know a lot about this country. So when you say Rwanda, people think genocide. I think they will also, for those who have been there, they will also think this is such a beautiful country with a um, beautiful nature. And I grew up in this small city where I could have access to literature. We could have access to a lot of things. The city was small, but with all this the lining of the jacaranda trees with this beautiful purple blooming. That's how you say. And I was loved by my mother, and I had I had the chance to go in a nice good school, international school. And then also I was different because I was mixed race. I didn't have my father didn't raise me, so I experienced also being different, being what we call here in France transfuge de classe. So I was from a middle class, but I was in the school with the kids from the elite of the expatriate. So I was feeling different, and I think this also nurtured my my gaze as a writer. And then, of course, the biggest pain, the hugest pain was that of the genocide, of losing a lot of people from my childhood, my family, my friends, losing my childhood. Actually, I had to leave my country, to leave my house. So Butare represents all that, of course. And for a writer, it's a terreau. It's like a soul that will nurture a lot of stories, of course.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think, yeah, it's clear your love and the beauty of Rwanda really shined in all your children scattered. And the time I've spent in Rwanda, it is a very, very beautiful country. Um, and
Oh, you've been
I,
there.
yes,
So
I
you
was able to
can
go to
talk
some.
about it. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yes, but yeah, I think you captured that well with the jacarandas and the all the different the nature around that's just very beautiful, and the evenings, even in the beginning that you read, the evening on the porch, on the front with between Blanche and her mother. Um, you can feel that and feel that
The
kind of
atmosphere, yes. Mm-hmm.
atmosphere, yes. Um, and in your book, obviously, it's a story of survivors. How do you see those survivor characters in your book? And then what do writing about survivors mean to the memory of genocide? And we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but if you have
Mm-hmm.
more to add.
I think this family is a family in tatters, right? Everybody has suffered different things, and so it's quite difficult for them to speak again. So I use this Rwandan proverb all along the text that says "Umutemeri w'ishavu ni ijosi." It means like the neck is the lead to sorrow. It's a very nice image, I think. When the sorrow is so big, the words got stuck here, and people don't speak. to their relatives, which is something that I want to connect with what I said earlier about the unhearable or unspeakable of the genocide. It's really something different to talk with stranger, to testify, to talk with your friends, and to talk with your own children. And this is something that I've experienced when I became a mother. It's not the same thing for me to go and testify in a high school or in front of people, and to talk with my own children as a survivor, because I really want to protect them from my trauma, from my wounds, and I don't want them to be, caught in this malediction of what has happened to my people. So it is really very much symbolized in this family, because Blanche and Immaculata, they don't manage to talk to each other. But then there is the next generation that with Stockley that will bring hope and joy and the possibility again to talk and to be heard. So I think it says something about it talks about the trauma and the transmission, intergenerational transmission. Yeah, and the strength of mothers, what mothers and grandmothers are able to do in front of the silence and the trauma of men.
Yeah, I think that theme was very clear in your book as well. Yeah, the strength of mothers and how they are at both times a victim of violence from men and also able to overcome that and able to attempt to make the life better for their children. That and that they're
And
human and
also
we don't know.
this novel. Sorry,
Go for it.
I cut you.
No, go
Yes,
ahead.
also this novel raises another very actual question, I think. As I told you, like the roots of the genocide against the Tutsi are in the colonial history. And in this book, the colonial history is symbolized by those jacaranda trees that are trees that were planted by the colonial administration. And so it's a very actual question, because it asks, what do we do with the traces left by the colonial history? What do we keep? What do we forgive? And how do people of my generation tell that story to the next generation in order to heal, in order not to remain caught in the resentment and anger and violence, and so only us can do it. And I think this is the power of storytelling also, is to liberate us from the phantoms. You say phantoms in English? The phantoms of the past. And I'm also very much involved in mental health here in France. I do train people on the mental health first aid. I also worked in suicide prevention, and I know how it is important to be able to, to put words on your own trauma, on your family's silence. This is liberating. And at a very large scale for society, it's especially a post-colonial society, telling the stories is really very important. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That is all the questions I have for you, but we have a few questions and comments from our audience here. We have one here from, and I'm gonna not pronounce these names correctly, and I know that, from Valens, talking about the poetry. They say, my opinion is that the poetry around the genocide against the Tutsi exists in the nature because most of the commemorative ceremonies, we see adult and young people claiming good poems, which just disappear because not collected, And if it is possible to collect them and proceed with preliminary analysis, we can enrich the existing database and populate this literary genre that is loved by many Rwandans. How do you see,
Mhm.
yeah, do you agree that the collection of poetry is important in Rwanda?
Yes, it's important. He's right. I do agree with you, Valence. Umeniman. Yes, yes, yes. But also, I think now there is something else. It's a video. Like Rwandan people do film a lot. We do have also a young generation of filmmakers, extraordinary filmmakers that are their films are being presented all around the world. So, people who are not very comfortable with the writing, they can do the through it video. What for me, what is the most important is to keep a trace, not to have it lost, and then the form will depend on what anybody can do.
Yeah, and I think that's the sentiment of a lot of our viewers today. Another one, Martin or Martine, probably, um, says that I think through Ibuka, the umbrella of genocide survivors, the poems around the genocide against the Tutsi can be collected, edited, analyzed, and published. And that's a sentiment Jacqueline also said about publishing is kind of an obstacle to collecting these poems and stories. And that survivors who are able to write may not be able to find a publisher or are told that their story is not good enough or not interesting enough for a publisher to pick up. How do you see the role of publishing these stories? Because of course anyone can post on the internet, on social media, but the role of a published work such as yours, how do you see that? What needs to change maybe, and why is it important that there's a published body of work as well?
I think Jacqueline is right. Huh? Um, there are some publishing houses in Rwanda that are really open to that kind of stories. As I mentioned, and I think that David who did this book, 100 Days, 100 Stories, it's a Huza Press. So this is a publishing house in English. They are the one who translated the book of Yolande Mukagasana that was first written in French into English. And in the French, for the French and Rwandan literature, there is Izuba publishing house that is it's a cooperative, so it's really non-profit, and they're doing great work too. So they are the one who are going to publish my first short story collection in Kinyarwanda. But of course, they don't have the same audience as we can have here. For me, I'm published in Flammarion in France. But I think what I tell people, the most important is to find a publishing house that will follow you uh, and fight for your book. And this is a discussion that we had with my friends with this group that we launched. Maybe it's important that some association of survivors launch their own publishing house. And this is something that has been done here in France. Le Mémorial de la Shoah, which is the Holocaust Memorial here in France. It is a very big institution. They have their publishing house and they publish testimonies. And so this is important because it will be really a pity if a publishing house say, no, your book will not be published because they think they're not going to sell it. And this is something that people can understand. Me, myself, I don't sell a lot of books at all. I have to do a lot of things other than that. But at least they're publishing me. But some publishing house will say, no, there's not enough audience or clients for your book. Then you can relate to a publishing house launched by survivors organization that will not tell you that. So I think in the forthcoming years, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think you answered that very well, and it was a very hopeful answer that more and more of these stories will be able to be published. Looks like we may have a question from Gus Mukararinda. Gus, if you would like to turn on your camera, hello, we'll let you speak.
Hello. Oh, hi. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. Yes. Hi. Yeah. It's really not a question that I have. It's a little contribution to the discussion we had because I myself I'm about to publish my novel.
Congratulations.
And thank you. Yes, we will be called The Snowfall,
Mm-hmm.
one voice account of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And it's I wrote like in I'll say in creative nonfiction, and everything you just shared here really I went through that because when I started, I had a publisher like in Toronto, one of the leading publishers in Toronto called Anik Press, but I got that contract because of a friend from the US who was also a writer. Of course, they trusted her immediately, and they gave me a contract without really knowing what I was going to do. And I had a good story, of course, because my friend like recommended that. And then, but when I started writing, it was so painful because every time I gave them a manuscript, they would change it. They would like remove the most important parts of my story. The real reason I really decided to write. And it was so painful because like when I looked at the narrative, the intention was more to show like my success of being Canadian. So it's like
Mm.
they don't care about the story, how it's written. They
Yeah.
want to just show, like, you've been through hell, now you're in heaven, right? So I had to give up that contract, and it was really hard. And I will say that this is how I found the solution is through, there's a proverb in Rwanda, they say, uh, akimuhana kazi imvura ihise. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I can say that, but like, you can't expect something from abroad because it will come after the rain. I don't know how I can say that, like, but you know. So and then I started contacting my fellow writers here, like Omar, Claver Irakoze from Rwanda, even Eugene Murango. I saw he's also here. Like I think the person behind the book, the 100 Stories. So, and all of them really, I explained them what I was going through and how I wanted to write my story the way it was. So they all helped me
Yes.
in different ways. And finally, I finished. And then even the publisher, I contacted Judance Kaitesi from Germany. She also went through the same thing I went through and then decided to actually have her own publishing house. And to be honest, I found the solution through the other survivors. They all just
Yes.
came together. I didn't, most of these guys, I haven't even met them in person, but they all helped me.
Mm-hmm.
And now the book is
Mm-hmm.
coming out like hopefully in a week or two. And what I say is like, I really was stubborn to just push and to do it the way I wanted. And then the feedback I received was really incredible. And
Mm-hmm.
Linda Melvin herself, just she's right. She wrote my forward, and the comment she gave me on my book was really, I mean, I felt like after 8 years fighting with these publishers and everything, it's like was a relief. So it's just wanted to say like we really can have solutions among us. We can help each other. And a little thing I want to mention is like the solution probably like it's hard to write like a fiction about the genocide. It's really hard. I know one person who did, and it's in French. It's from Edmonton, Alberta. Artemo Rurangwa. He wrote this book called Les Angoisses de l'Aïd. It's a fiction, but it's a very good book. So I really don't see it, but it's not. It was not easy for him too, because he was my neighbor. I knew what he went through to do that. But it's a book that I recommend to understand really what it is like to write fiction about the genocide. And but the main thing I can also recommend, I know Omar, we've been talking about that, like about the creative nonfiction. I know it's not easy, but it's probably the best way to interest the young generation to read. And yeah, That was my small contribution. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
guys. Yes, thank you very much for your testimony. I think you were very right to fight for your history. We can't let other people say what is important and what is not. We know where we come from. We know what we want to share with the world, and so this is, yeah. And also, it shows the solidarity between survivors. We decided to launch the project we're having. It's between Canada and France, because we were discussing with other survivors, and some were not able to write by themselves because they were not very confident, or so they wrote with a French journalist, or for example. But at the end, they were really not happy with that what the journalist had decided to write, because it didn't belong to them anymore, or it had turned out that the story was no longer focused on them, but it was focused on the journalist, who became the hero of the story. And they were like, but this is not what I wanted. This was not the deal. So yeah, we have to fight for that. But I'm really happy that you managed. So I'm looking forward to read your book. And maybe another advice that I would like to give, because this is a real issue, and with the Rwandan community, is that we don't read enough. We don't read enough apart from the Rwandan histories. And I think it's really important that even the younger, they could like have this education, because like in all societies, parents and children are on their phones, they're on TV, but we really have to nurture the culture of reading, reading small books to the children, reading even manga. It's okay, but just read and get used to that. And if we stop doing that, because I see a lot of survivors who write today, their parents were teachers, or they loved reading when they were smaller, they had this thing in them. If we stop teaching to our children and the younger generation, to give them le goût de lire, like the pleasure of reading, then what will happen is 10 years, 20 years by now, other people will be writing our stories again. So if there's something that we can do as parents, as aunties, as godmother or godfather, is just transmit the reading process, and offer books and read books. And this is something important, because it's also the future.
Very good advice, Beata. Yeah, especially fostering a love of reading in the youth is so important. We have a question kind of along these lines from Gabrielle. They asked, do you have experience communicating your stories to youth? And if so, how do you approach these discussions, and how were they received?
Yes, I do that a lot, especially with my last book, The Convoy. I do go in high schools and universities, and mainly for now, I have done this in France. And I really received a great quality of listening from the teenagers. Really, people think that teenagers are only self-centered and interested in what's going on TikTok. This is not true. The other thing is, for the teachers, like history teachers, it's really hard for them to tell them what has happened in to get them interested in what has happened in Rwanda 30 years ago. 30 years ago for them, it's prehistory. Rwanda for them is like another planet. But when they have someone who incarnate, do you say that in English? Incarnate? Like who physically represent the story, a real person who comes and testify, then this is something they'll never forget. So yeah, I do that. I can't do as much as I'm asked because a lot of teachers are contacting me. And of course, the teachers are really interested because at the same time, you will have the French teacher, the teacher of literature, and the teacher of history. They connect with like they have the students, the pupils work on my books. But yes, this is something important, and especially now we see like the most of the survivors of the Holocaust are very old or are already gone. So if you want to, because when I go in school, I'm not only talking about the Rwandan history, of course, I also talk about the genocide of the Armenian genocide, the genocide against the Jews. I even talk about what has happened in Cambodia. So it's something that can raise their interest. So yeah.
For that answer. Again, yeah, just really important to continue to teach and show the youth and give them a chance to show how.
Yeah, and in
they
Rwanda, yes, I see Omar is what is a Ishami Foundation is doing a great job, yes, in this direction, of course.
I have one more question, and then we'll let Omar wrap up. But we have a question from Eric. He says, I am interested in your views on publishing the stories of perpetrators alongside survivor stories. Do you believe this approach enhances people's understanding of the genocide's history? And then why or why not? Interesting.
Did you ever read stories from the perpetrators of, say, the Holocaust? Those people, they don't speak. So me, myself, as a survivor, I'm not going to put my energy in giving voice to the perpetrators. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't hear them. I think it's maybe interesting on the sociological point of view, and even on the psychoanalytical point of view, to try to, hear those people. So from my experience of a reader, the only thing that I read about Rwanda was a book by a French journalist, Jean Asfeld. It is called Une saison de machette. So I don't know what the translation in English.
Yeah, machete season.
Yes, he went in a jail, in a prison in the east of Rwanda, because he always works on one small region of Rwanda, Nyamata, and he talked with the genocide perpetrators for weeks, and so it's quite interesting. What you get from them is that they said that it was an order. They did obey the order, like Eichmann did the same. We did obey the order, but nothing about why they invented. Because it's one thing to obey to an order, kill your neighbor. So I take a gun or a machete, I kill the person. This is something. But the way they kill the people, like the atrocity, and even the inventivity they had in making people painful, agonize. This is something they invented. It was not in the orders. And I don't know if we will ever get an answer to that. But I'm never going to write a story about even novel or about a perpetrator. This is not my focus. But if people do that, why not? And what is quite interesting is most of the time it's fiction, and our society prefer to read that kind of books instead of books of victims. I don't know why, but I think of this book by Jonathan Little, Les Bienveillants, that sold millions and millions of copies. Oh, yeah, I'm still trying to understand why people prefer those kind of books. There's a fascination for violence, maybe, or people try to understand, to reassure themselves that they are not going to become monsters. But what you have to understand is genocide perpetrators are not monsters. They are still very sane in their heads. They're not suffering mental disorder. Their fathers, their brothers, their husbands, and they kill just because they're allowed to do that. So I think what people should read more is not histories about murderers, is maybe political and sociological texts that make us understand how a society allow this to happen. And today, this could happen. And we are into that. Extremism, propaganda, separating people, racism, hate. How does a society allow, nurture, create that? If we understand how we are manipulated or how we accept these things to happen, sometimes by voting for those kind of people, then we can stop that. Not by understand what is in the mind of a killer. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think you answered that very well. And I think it's interesting. You did point out, how many stories of perpetrators of the Holocaust do we read? Not many. And so it's important to keep that in mind, and think, like you said, the broader perspective of maybe how a country can get, or a society can get to that point where something like genocide is allowed to even happen. So not to end on a low note, we're going to hand it back over to Omar. Thank you so much, Beata, for your time. It's been wonderful to chat with you and learn more about your book, Children Scattered, and your other works you're working on. Thank you so much for sharing your story and echoing a lot of the sentiments in the chat here. Thank you for centering survivor narratives, and also for sharing your gift, because this is a gift of storytelling and your perspectives. So thank you. I'm going to hand it back over to Omar to wrap up, but thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you for hosting me and for all your wonderful questions. And it was a great pleasure. And thank you very much, Omar, murakoze cyane, for organizing all this and for those 2 hours spent with you guys.
Thank you. I'm the one who should do thank you first. What a great conversation. And Maya, you are a very great journalist. I can tell from your questions and the flow of the conversation, the engaging of everyone. You really did a great job, of course. For those who don't know Maya, she's a radio presenter and producer, and you can tell how brilliant she is. And thank you so much for leading us to this conversation with Beata Umubyeyi. Beata, my friend, thank you so much for, first of all, accepting our invitation, and you are very brilliant insights that are very helpful. When you are, sharing with us, I could see. I wish every Rwandan could hear this conversation, and because it is very rich, and of course your knowledge is very rich and will contribute to a lot of things. And thank you so much for availing yourself and share with us and the great work you are doing. For those who don't know, the recent book of Beata is Le Convoi. Please go to Amazon and buy it. And those who will want to invite Beata to your universities and different talks like this, you can tell that she's a unique and brilliant person that Rwanda and the world have. Thank you, Beata. And of course,
instead of going to Amazon, please go to your local bookseller.
Yes, thank you so much. We took note on that. When you were talking about the Butare, I have my friend here, Gatari, who is from Butare. I told him in a message that you can understand that Butare used to have two libraries. Now, from your talk, we heard that it has honorary universities library. We can expect that there will be more through his
Yes.
voice. And this is the essence of this conversation. It's, to remind each other or to also share with each other the importance of libraries, especially community libraries. And of course, I can't thank enough my dear Krista Phillips. Phillips, can you put your video? People can see you. I know you are always behind the scene, but everyone who saw the wonderful flyers and everything designed for this conversation, she's the person behind. And thank you so much for your great work. Kristen and Maya visited Rwanda this year. So they've been to Nyamata, Butare, and Kigali, and the Kalonji. And of course, from Krista's Instagram, you can tell a lot of wonderful moments they captured, not only from the people they met, but also when they visited Akagera. She is a very good storyteller in terms of like using images. Thank you so much. I will tell Professor Shannon that both of you are brilliant people that America has in the coming future. And of course, our audience who were very loyal to this conversation, to our Imuru Library, who came, I can't, forget to thank my friend Mrekatete, who shared this conversation everywhere. My friend David Russell, who's a board member of a lot of huge organization in London, but who managed to get time to be with us. Thank you so much, David. And I think those who are reading a message, they saw David's message about the recent book produced by Ishami Foundation, but also I know David has a support in that, but also when we talk about Ishami Foundation, of course, we talk about Mulangwa, who is also with us, Eric, my friend, the founder of Ishami, who did a huge work from when he was a player of Rayon Sport. For those who don't know, Rayon Sport is a very popular team in Rwanda. And of course, today he is contributing a lot in the literature of and the debate, the global debate about the 1994 genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda. Of course, other people, survivors from the 1994 genocide against Tutsi. I can see some body members of Ibuka USA, Lucky Favorite was here, and other my American friends who also came here to support today. And thank you so much. When Maya was in conversation with you, she asked you about women, and you reminded us that the founder of Rwandan literature is a woman, Nyirarumaga, the Queen Mother Nyirarumaga. And of course, this is a region where it comes from. And I don't know if it's by a coincidence or not, but among the most published Rwandan authors, of course, we have Beata and Mukasonga. So they are women. And even though we have great writers like Kagame Alexi and great poets who are also the legends of Rwandan society like Nyakayonga Kamsale and the others. But we can see in the contemporary literature that Beata and Mukasonga are leading us. Thank you for being a very good role models and examples to our society. And literature humanizes society. I liked the way you put it very well, Beata, by saying that it's only literature that connects past, present, and the future. I can see my friend Martin Mohoza, who is working for Ministry of Civic Education and the Unit of Rwandans. Then we can be assured that that message will reach to those high tables to ensure that literature is at the center of conversation. Of course, you are always welcome at Uhuru Library, which is still very young. And thank you, Beata, for putting your support today to ensure that it's going to become among the contributors like others. Please expect our book, the book that me and myself and Gabrielle Cohen, who is also here. She's my former classmate at Binghamton University. So we are publishing a children's book called Among Their Massacre. So where we will be analyzing the massacre as, of course, Muyaga. For those who know the history of Rwanda knows Muyaga. So we hope that when we invite you to the launch of that book in the coming years, before Gabi go to London, to Scotland, we will have you as our guest, So in Kinyarwanda we say ararekwa ntashira, so we can tell and talk, we can share, but let's call it a day and know that from the bottom of my heart and everyone here, on behalf of Maya, Krista, whom we worked tirelessly to ensure that our guest Beata is here to share with us this knowledge. Is when it would be great like it was today. Thank you so much. You are regents of our society. You are regents of our world. Our world needs voices like this, needs a conversation like this to be humanized again. Instead of being antagonistic and dehumanizing like some of the rhetorics we are seeing everywhere. So thank you so much. Thank you, Beata. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Enjoy your evening, your day, for those who depends on where you are in the world. But also, Merry Christmas to the Christian who are going to celebrate it, and a happy end of the year. May God bless you.
Thank you very much for all, and bravo for everything that you're doing with in Huye Library and all the team. Rabeho.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.